Hello, good evening, everyone. One thing that might be a bit of a surprise, because that was a part missing from the bio, is the fact that I'm speaking the King's English. I am an Israeli. I do serve in the IDF. But as you can tell, I was actually raised in the United Kingdom and also South Africa, even though I don't have a heavy accent. When I was 17, I went to Israel for a year, ostensibly for a gap year, and that changed the course of my life because after that year, especially after meeting with young Israeli peers, I changed the direction of my life and took the road less traveled and volunteered as a Chayil Boded, as a lone soldier, to serve in a combat unit for 3 years. In my initial 3 years, I also did a course Chofshim Kravim, which is the combat medics course. And one of the big lessons I learned in my basic training, in my regular service, was the importance of always understanding what is correct and what is right, and being that person to step up. The importance of friends, the importance of never underestimating our abilities, and most importantly, the importance of actually being part of something much bigger than just yourself, which is really the key lesson to basic training. Something needs to get done. You have to do it yourself, just as you'd expect other people to. And all this explains why, many decades later, I happen to be the second oldest person serving in Gaza. There's one older person than me, and his name is Hetzi Halevi, otherwise known as the Chief of Staff of the IDF, who has 6 months on me. Otherwise, you might ask yourself, I know I don't look it, why is a 55-year-old in the middle of Gaza serving as a combat medic? And the answer is quite simple. The answer is one Hebrew word, and the Hebrew word is mishahu, which literally means somebody. And there's always a point in basic training when they're trying to transform a bunch of high school kids who are quite selfish and self-centered, in other words, high school kids, into a cohesive fighting unit. And a lot of basic training is how to make that transformation. And there's one point in basic training when we run around a huge amount for hours in the desert, and the sergeant will say, you've got 5 minutes to rest in the tent. And we all collapse into the tent with our gun and our combat boots on. And he'll stand outside and he'll say, I need a volunteer. So the initial reaction of teenagers is, he'll say, I need mishahu, I need someone to volunteer. And your initial reaction is, no, mishahu, someone, till he says, kulam achutza, everyone outside. And after running around again and asking to volunteer, when you finally get what it means to be a soldier in the IDF, when you finally get what it means to be part of something much bigger than you, is when you say, you know what, this is the right thing to do. So I'll go outside now and let my friends rest, and I'll be the mishahu. That all stems from the quote of Mahatma Gandhi, who famously said, we must become the change we wish to see. You can't always say, let someone else do it. There's a time when you have to carpe diem, seize the moment, and do it yourself. If the voice calls, get up and do what's right. So that is why on August 2006, despite the fact I was about as far away as Israel as I could be, I was in Australia, I responded to the call up for the Second Lebanon War with many other Israelis who were abroad. And that is why on the 7th of October, this previous year, after absorbing the enormity of the shock of what has happened to us, and it still I haven't quite absorbed, I don't think anyone has, considering we are present continuous, we're still living through it. It wasn't even a question. That lesson I learned all those decades ago meant that I dusted out my uniform that I have literally not worn for 1.5 decades. I was 40 when I was taken out of the Middle Women rosters, the reserve duty, because combat soldiers are taken out at the age of 40. I was honorably discharged, taken off the computer systems, and thanked for my service, and even got a nice little letter. And 15 years later, after the 7th of October, my first question I asked was, after recovering from this sheer shock, is what can I do? How can I help our country? How can I help our people? One thing about being a combat medic, it's kind of like riding a bicycle. You don't forget. It's a life skill. I've been keeping up on the literature. Thank God I work in Israel, as you might have heard in the introduction, as a tour guide. And I work a lot with teens and college students. I'm very, very fit physically, and also still have the knowledge of being a medic. So what did I do? In Israel, whenever someone says no, you know you're a real Israeli, when that means that's where you start the negotiation point. So I went down to a combat medical base somewhere in the Negev desert where I heard they might be looking for medics. In my uniform, after dusting off 15 years worth of dust, talked our way in through the main gate of the base, despite people telling me you can't get into an army base. I sort of charmed my way in. and then literally went from unit to unit, speaking to the doctors, speaking to the commanding officers, selling myself. I eventually got to a unit, it's called the Palmar in Hebrew, which is a Plugat Lechima Merchavi Refuit, which is a bit of a mouthful, which literally means a combat medical unit, more or less. And I spoke to the second in charge, who was also a medical doctor, as well as being a major in the military. I said, listen, I've been in Gaza, I've been in Lebanon, I served for decades as a combat medic. Right now, we're going to need combat medics. And when he saw that I was not going to go away and how much motivation I had to serve, he's like, okay, you're in. And then I start my biggest battle. The joke goes, I fought, and I fought, and eventually I got into the IDF. Because the biggest obstacle I overcame in all these last few months has been something called Israeli bureaucracy. Once the officer told me I could join his unit, I then went to the logistics people in the base and said, sign me up. And they're like, what's your name? What's your serial number? They're like, dude, you have not served for 1.5 decades. You're not even in the system. You know, just go home and don't call us, we'll call you. And for 6 days, I stood there making it such a nuisance that eventually let me back into the army. And that's how my odyssey began. And once I found myself in the unit, it was quite incredible because I know you're just seeing me here with a shirt on, with my army shirt. I'm going to share a screen and show you what I was wearing 2 weeks ago, what I'll be wearing again this Sunday when I return to the unit. So 2 weeks after that interview, can you see the picture on the screen? Yep. So 2 weeks after that interview, this is what I was wearing. This is a combat medic's gear. Behind my gun, there's a ceramic bulletproof vest that weighs about 10 kilos. That's about 20 pounds. 2.2 pounds is a kilo. I can't remember how the conversion goes. It's heavy. And on top of that, I have the combat medic's vest, all the equipment, the Kevlar helmet, with a tank in the background. And here I am on the suburb of Gaza. And the incredible thing about the IDF is the sheer melting pot. It always amazed me in my service and my years of reserve duty, and it amazes me now. We have people in my unit who come from every single walk of life: rich, poor, religious, secular, left-wing, right-wing, new immigrants, veteran Israelis, and nobody cares. Because once that uniform was put on, that is a great equalizer. Everyone is there for one purpose and one purpose alone, and that is to serve our country and to stop the war against terror. And the amazing thing is, when I was in my original service, it was literally a boys' club. If there were girls in the army, and Israel's the only army in the world that does draft women, they were all secretaries or in intelligence. No one in a combat role. Right now in my unit, and I'm going to switch to another picture over here. I'm going to switch to another picture. We have female doctors, we have female paramedics, we have female combat medics, and also female combat soldiers. My unit now consists of all of those people. We have surgeons, paramedics, combat medics, and we have combat troops who put a circle around us whenever we treat the wounded, because sometimes it's under fire inside Gaza. The point of my unit is basically when a soldier is injured, and you might hear about the killed soldiers, and every killed soldier, of course, is a universe, and it's what they call in psychology reverse order death. Parents should not be burying children. It should always be the other way around. And that's what's been happening. Just yesterday, my unit had to take 9 heroes who had entered eternity out of the field. And for every killed soldier, there are an unbelievable amount of wounded soldiers. The number right now is running close to 6,500 wounded soldiers. And that's not even including the psychologically wounded with post-traumatic stress syndrome. That's just the physically wounded, from people who will never walk again to people with shrapnel to people with bullets. And that's what we deal with in our particular unit. So what happens is inside Gaza, when they're deep inside the battle, the embedded combat medic does the initial treatment. In other words, the life-saving, stopping arterial bleeding, etc., as fast as they can. They get them close to the border, where we swoop in our armored ambulances and armored cars and treat the wounded. If they're really badly, critically wounded, we call in the 669 helicopter evacuation commandos. I'm going to show you a clip about what they do just in a moment. If they're moderately to lightly wounded, we take them in our armored ambulances all the way to the closest hospital, either in Beersheba or in Ashkelon, all the while treating and stabilizing them. And that's what saves their lives. If Israeli medics and combat medics and doctors would have treated Princess Diana, she would have still been alive. She was left for 2 hours in that car before she got to the hospital, before she wasn't even treated, and she was conscious. So we treat them all the way from the moment they're injured, all the way till they get to the hospital. So I'm just going to take a pause right now and show you a scene of an actual medical evacuation. I filmed this 3 weeks ago. We were called in to the inside Gaza, and unfortunately, there were 2 wounded soldiers. One was very badly wounded with burns when anti-tank missile had gone right into armored personnel carrier as the back door opened. And we had to treat him with medication, and we had to call in the choppers, who are always hovering, always hovering. They're Black Hawk helicopters. They have doctors and paramedics inside, and they have Apache helicopters covering them on top. So I just want to show you what a medical evacuation looks like in the field itself. This is not a made-for-movie TV. This is actual footage of a soldier being evacuated from the field of battle somewhere near the Gaza border, which I'm not going to say where, but I will show you the scene, and I'll narrate what you can actually see. And I'll tell you exactly the story of what happened. So let me just go to the clip. Okay. Okay, can you see the chopper? Okay. So what you're seeing right now is a field somewhere just inside the border with Gaza. There's a helicopter coming in. There's blue smoke telling them where to land. We called the helicopter 2 minutes previously. They're always hovering. We explained on the radio exactly what the situation of the soldier was. So the entire medical crew was on the hospital, waiting on the flying hospital, otherwise known as the helicopter, waiting to receive the wounded soldier. You'll see what happens next. He's just off the picture to the left. Okay, so the chopper's coming in. And you can see there's the wounded soldier on the left now. He's still being treated by the paramedics and the medics. He has 60% second and third degree burns on his body. He has burn bandages, heavily medicated. And there's a lightly wounded soldier next to him. So they go and secure. This is the 669 commandos. They're taking the wounded soldier to the chopper. And there's the lightly wounded soldier behind him. But we cut the clothes off just to make sure there's no shrapnel or stuff that we'd missed. And they're going that chopper. Don't forget, we're actually inside the Gaza border. And I don't know if you're taking time, but within less than 20 seconds from the patients entering the chopper, it's already lifting off and taking off to the nearest burns unit. 4 minutes later, it's on the roof of the hospital. And within 10 minutes, he's already being treated in intensive care burns unit. That's how fast it goes. All right. So the moving story that you hear when you're inside, people often ask me, what is it the soldiers say? So the first question they always ask is exactly the same question. People ask me about motivation. Don't forget, this war's been going on for 90 days. That's 3 months. But it's always the same question. And the question is, Matai ani chozer le'achim sheli? When am I going back to my brothers? They always want to know when they're going back. And some of them clearly are not going to be going back because some of the wounds are pretty serious. But that's always the first question. When can I go back? They've just been wounded, but when can I go back? Just last week, one of the soldiers was wounded by shrapnel about a month and a half ago. Shrapnel had a bullet in his arm. Once he got better, he went straight back in again, and 2 days later, he was killed. Now, he didn't need to go back, but he wanted to go back. And that's a sense of what they call in Australia mateship, or intense friendship that we feel fighting with our brothers, people we would literally take a bullet for as they would for us. Because we understand that this is a war against evil. This is a war for the future of the state of Israel, and indeed for the Western world. So the first thing we ask the soldiers to do is to call their parents, because they're going to hear, we don't want the parents to hear from the army, your son or daughter's been wounded. We need them to call their parents once they've calmed down enough and say 2 words. And those 2 words are ani beseder. They can just hear their child's voice say, I'm okay. And that immediately will calm the parents down before they get the official phone call. So this particular guy who we medvaced, he was not so beseder. He was actually heavily sedated with morphine and even with ketamine. But he managed just for a couple of seconds to hold it together enough to tell his father, because they never want to speak to their mother. They always say, "Father, tell mom that," because mums, it's very difficult for them to handle the stress. He said, "I'm okay. Meet me at the hospital." Then he was almost exhausted. He turned around and said to me, with real struggle, "I just got married a month ago. I want to be an Abba." And I said to him, "You'll be an Abba." He lives right next to me. I live in Mordin. He lives in Hashmonaim, which is literally next to Mordin. I said, "You will be an Abba, and I will come to your Brit or your Brita." And then he just passed out. That's what he wanted to hear. And we followed the progress afterwards. And thank God he is making a recovery, even though he'll be very severely scarred between his neck and his middle section for the rest of his life. But that is the kind of stuff that's going on. Now, that's pretty intense. I want to share another ambulance story with you before I wrap up. And that is, this is stuff you don't normally hear. This is the stuff you don't see in the mainstream media. The next picture I'm going to show you is someone who's moderately wounded in our ambulance going to the hospital. And this picture, let's go to screen share again. Okay. So this picture, when I can find it, 1 second. Oh, here it is. Okay, can you see the picture of the guy talking on the phone? Can you see that picture?
You need,
Yes?
no, we see all the
Interesting.
icons. You need to click on the,
Oh, I
on the,
did. I was doing so well till then. Okay, let me have to do that one again. I'm going to stop the share and do it again. Just talk quietly amongst yourselves. Let's try one more time. Screen share. You've got Tuvia IDF there. I'm going to click on this one picture here. Let's see if you see this. You can't see that one?
no, we can't see that, unfortunately.
Okay, so I'm going to leave it open and do one more time. Sorry about this. This is despite all the sharing. Oh, here it is. Let's try one again. You've got it now. Okay. Right, you can see the picture now of the soldier talking on the phone, correct? So this soldier, he's in the Tzanachanim, he's in the paratroopers. He is being treated. He's being treated because in his right arm, the arm you can't see, he has a bullet in his arm. He has shrapnel on his back. Him and his unit were lured into a building in northern Gaza because they heard in Hebrew someone saying Abba, Abba. And it was a recording in Hebrew what they thought was a child, one of the hostages saying, "Dad, Dad." And they went in, the building was booby-trapped. And when the next force went in to extricate them, they were also blown. There was a second booby trap. There was 8 out of the force of 10 were wounded. We're taking them out. He's on the phone saying to his dad, "I'm okay." Meanwhile, of course, he was drugged up to the gills. And in his right arm, the bullet is still in his right arm. He has shrapnel on his back. And he said to us, "Can you just put on some music?" We said, "Sure, who do you want to hear?" And in a very ironic twist, if you were following the news yesterday, he wanted to hear Idan Ahmedi, who was the soldier who was one of the soldiers who was wounded yesterday, one of the stars of Fauda, who's also a very well-known singer in Israel. And a lot of the soundtrack of this war are songs that he's written because he himself was a combat soldier. We said, sure. And we have a female paramedic and we have a female combat medic in the ambulance. They have great voices. I don't, but they do. And they were singing along with the music. And if you can imagine the scene, this is an only in Israel scene. We're putting out to the hospital in Soroka and Beersheba. The girls are having a beautiful duo with the music. This guy's totally enjoying it. We're coming to the hospital. And do you know what he said? He said, "Drive around the block one more time. I'm really enjoying this." You know, the guy's got a bullet in his arm, shrapnel all over his back, and he was just having a good time. Of course, we didn't. This is one of these little stories that you have in Israel. Now, before I take questions, someone is not muted. Let's take care of that. All right. Before I take questions, I just wanted to sum up exactly. I'm telling you the human stories just from a personal interactions with some of these incredible heroes, these soldiers. Don't forget, all these reserve soldiers and all soldiers in combat units are all volunteers. Anyone can get up and say, "I don't want to be in a combat unit." Anyone can get up and say, "I don't want to be in this reserve unit." Everyone who's there, all the 300,000 reservists, and all the standing men and women in these combat units are all voluntary because they all understand one simple thing. En la Nubrera, we do not have a choice. This is a war against darkness, a war against evil. We're fighting for the survival of our country, for the dignity of Jews worldwide, and indeed for the Western world itself. And just to highlight the differences between our forces, the forces of morality and goodness, and the forces of darkness, I'm going to sum up this part of the presentation with a 2-minute video of Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner, who's an IDF spokesperson. By the way, he's also from London. So anyone with a British accent sounds convincing. So you're going to hear from him 2 minutes exactly what the difference is between us and them, between good and evil, between light and darkness. After that, we'll open up to questions in the comment section. Okay, stop share. Are we on film clips or not? Okay, no, I know what to do. Hold on 1 second. Okay, now we'll get it this time. Screen share. Okay.
Within the IDF's battle against Hamas and other terrorist organizations in Gaza, there is a huge difference in the way the parties conduct themselves. This is not a battle between one army versus another army, but rather a state actor that abides by international standards, laws, and regulations, and a brutal terrorist organization. Indeed, as a military organization, we have tactical advantages, operational advantages, but also we have a huge challenge being the only party that actually abides and commits itself to the international standards and distinguishing between combatants and non-combatants on the battlefield. The IDF, unlike Hamas, obligates itself to abide by international law and makes a huge effort to limit civilian casualties and to limit the effect on the civilian population.
טוב, דבר עברית, מצוין. מה שמך? מה שלומך? הכל בסדר? צבא ישראלי כרגע, אנחנו צריכים להפציץ את הבית, עכשיו באמצע אנחנו עושים את כל המאמצים שלא יפגע בבתים האחרים שום דבר. תוודא בבקשה, כי אין שם אף אחד. תגיד לאנשים שלא, כי עוד 5 דקות אנחנו מפציצים.
In contrast, Hamas are launching rockets at civilians. They are trying to infiltrate, abduct, kill and maim civilians. Hamas intentionally put the Palestinian population of Gaza in harm's way. They are launching rockets from the courtyards of mosques. They are hiding their weapons beneath schools. They are intentionally exploiting the civilian population for their terrorist missions.
واجهوا الطيران العسكري الإسرائيلي بصدور عارية ليحموا بيوتهم. أعتقد أن هذه سياسة أثبتت نجاعتها، ونحن في الحركة ندعو شعبنا إلى اعتماد هذه السياسة.
The IDF uses weapons to defend civilians. Hamas uses civilians to defend its weapons.
Thank you. I'm going to ask for people to put questions in the chat, and I'll start us off by asking if you could just talk a little bit about the army morale and how the soldiers are feeling.
It's not just the morale of the army, it's the morale of the people of Israel. I mean, really, just before the war started, I think we all realized Israel was on the cusp of potentially a civil war. There was demonstrations weekly. The country was ripped between left and right. Once the war started, suddenly we realized we need to focus on what we have in common and what divides us. And that unity is just as now as it was at the 7th of October. We have when we come out of Gaza, we have a rear base where we don't have a field kitchen, but we're never, ever short of civilians coming and making food for us and barbecues, Anglo communities from Modi'in and from Ra'anana driving down and making amazing food. Israel hasn't fought a winter war since 1948. All of our winter clothes come from the Michael Levine Lone Soldier Foundation in the United States, where American Jews have donated literally tens of thousands of dollars for our winter equipment. Last 2 weeks ago, we even got a shipment of hand-knitted woolen hats from Arizona with notes inside. Dear soldier, we love and appreciate you. Love, Sadie, Phoenix, Arizona. So when you see things like that, it warms our heart because we realize it's not just them and us, the Israeli and the diaspora Jews, but you really realize we're one family. So the motivation level amongst the soldiers is sky high. It hasn't dissipated in the slightest. And also the unity of the nation and the catchphrase, I think, which sums everything up is B'yachad Nanatzeach. Together we will be victorious. Now that we finally realize, unfortunately, to great tragedy, that we need to focus on what we have in common and not what divides us. So I'd sum that up in 2 words, and that is sky high. Still, which is quite amazing.
Thank you. I appreciate that because here in the US, there's a lot of turbulence, but we'll get to that. We just got the question of, I'm sorry, someone else needs to mute themselves.
We need to mute
Yes,
someone.
thank you. Can you describe the living conditions for combat soldiers? Are units mostly coming out regularly to sleep in safety, or do they set up camps in cleared areas within Gaza?
Okay, so I'd like to just point out that Adam Cohen, who wrote that question, himself was a lone soldier and a sniper as a sniper in the Gaza. In the Nachal Brigade, and I happen to know that because I had the honor of being in Bar-Ilan University with him many years ago. He lives in New Jersey, and he, as a combat soldier, asked what the conditions are like. And the conditions, quite simply, are very similar to what they were all those decades ago. I still have a 1,000-star accommodation, otherwise known as a 2-man tent. Half the tent is me, the other half of the tent is just the equipment, the helmet, the webbing, the boots, everything. So we sleep in tents in very, very primitive conditions when we're actually on the periphery. A lot of soldiers on the periphery are located within vacated kibbutzim and yeshuvim around Gaza. And we need to remember there's still 180,000 internally displaced Israelis. And this war is costing the country 1 billion shekels a day, both housing those internally displaced Israelis and the actual, for the military itself. The conditions are still, to sum it up in a word, pretty primitive. And when we're inside Gaza, we have our boots on, our equipment on at all times, helmets, flak jackets, bulletproof vests, webbing. And sometimes we're in there for like 30-hour shifts. We'll come out for a few hours just to breathe and decompress, and then straight back in again. So there's no buildings, there's no heating, there's no field kitchen. It's all pretty primitive for those frontline combat troops. And that's just the reserve units. The actual field units stay in those conditions in Gaza, sometimes for weeks at a time. In the 3 months I was in the army, I was home for 2 Shabbatot, 2 in 3 months.
Here in the U.S. and around the world, there have been many calls for ceasefire. So what are the soldiers in your unit saying? And is there general unity of purpose in continuing this war until Hamas is destroyed?
Ceasefire is another word for surrender to the Hamas. That's the way the IDF look at that. Let's not forget that on the 6th of October 2023, we were at a ceasefire with the Hamas. And the Hamas broke this ceasefire, as they have all the other ceasefires previously, simply because any agreement with a radical Islamic terror organization is literally not worth the paper that it's signed on. It doesn't matter how many international mediators there are, they have literally broken every single ceasefire. And Israelis across the board, I mean, I can look at my own unit. We have people who vote from Meretz to Shas. That's from the extreme left to the extreme right of Israel's political spectrum. And everyone's on the same page. Everyone in my unit are family people. We have the paramedic in my ambulance has 8 children, including 4 who are serving in the Gaza Strip. And he donated a kidney a month before the war and didn't have to serve. But he begged to serve because everyone realizes that this time we're not leaving Hamas. If there's one Hamas terrorist still acting in the Gaza Strip, people aren't going to want to live back in those communities on the border. And let's not forget those kibbutzim on the border, Kfar Aza, Be'eri, names that have entered infamy in Israel. They were the most peace-loving, left of the political spectrum kibbutzim who believed in coexistence, who gave the Palestinians a chance, who had them working in their kibbutzim, who took them daily to hospitals in Israel. And they understand now that it's you cannot surrender to evil. What has to happen in Gaza after the war is what happened in Germany after World War II. They had a denazification process. We need a de-Hamasification process to eradicate this evil ideology. So ceasefire just means surrender to evil as far as the IDF soldiers are concerned.
Can you talk a little bit about the ethics of the IDF and some of the difficult decisions that they've been faced with in the field? You alluded to it earlier.
Right. I mean, there are rules of engagement within the IDF. People quite mistakenly think that proportionality means, oh, look, there's a lot more of them being killed than of Israelis, therefore it's a disproportionate war. That is wrong. That term is only ever used with regard to Israel. When the United States of America and the United Kingdom were fighting a war against terror in Afghanistan and Iraq, you never heard the term proportionality. You never heard that at all, or disproportionate response. As the pundit Douglas Murray famously said, what does that mean, proportionality? That Israel has to go to Gaza and find a music festival, and good luck with that, and murder exactly the same amount of young revelers. They have to decapitate the exact same amount of babies. They have to murder exactly the same amount of grandparents. They have to burn alive exactly the same amount of families who were burned alive. That's proportionality. That's not what it means. It doesn't mean more or less. The difference between Israel and the Hamas, what Peter Lerner alluded to in his comments, are civilians killed in war? Sure, but it's not a deliberate state policy with Israel. It's an accident of war, and it happened, just like America accidentally bombed a hospital in Afghanistan. That wasn't a deliberate policy, but it happened, right? We are out to kill terrorists. And the reason less Jews are killed and less Israelis are killed is because we've invested billions of dollars into defense systems, into shelters, into bunkers. The billions of dollars provided by the American taxpayer and the European Union taxpayer to the Gazan citizens have all been invested into terror, and have not one single dollar has been invested into the safety and the future and defense of the Gazan civilians, rather than to the bank accounts and of the billionaire rulers of Hamas, and also of the terror mechanism there. So Israel is fighting a moral war. Colonel Richard Kemp, who was a former commander of the British force in Afghanistan, famously stated in front of the United Nations that Israel is the most moral army in the world. No other army loses its element of surprise except for Israel. We warn them with millions of SMSs and phone calls and non-lethal bombs and leaflets and all sorts of methods that we are going to go and attack in a few minutes, as you saw in that film. We lose the element of surprise to avoid civilian collateral damage. It does happen. It's an accident. It's not a deliberate policy, as opposed to the 15,000 missiles Hamas have fired into Israel for the sole purpose of killing civilians.
Did we lose Jordana somewhere? I don't see her on the screen. So I am going to, this has never happened before, but this is live television, folks. Yeah. Oh, okay. You know what? Actually, breaking news, Jordana in Milburn has lost power. So I guess there really is weather in that part of New Jersey. And so I'm going to ask what I think is going to be the last question, which is, Tuvia, we have all been supporting the war effort, Israel's humanitarian needs, sending money to pay for ceramic vests for soldiers and helmets and thermal clothing to keep you warm during the cold weather. But I guess, the last question I would ask is, how can we continue to support you and the soldiers in your combat medics, soldiers in the unit? What's the best way for us to be able to show our love and to support this effort?
Okay, so I'll very quickly, because Jews always answer questions with questions. Why do they? I don't know. Why do they? But we're going to, I'm going to answer this with a question. It's like, what do you think, Linda? And I'll go over. What do you think is the best way the Jews of the diaspora can show their support to the IDF frontline combat troops? I'll give you a clue. It's something you're about to do next week.
Well, you're probably going to say to get on a plane and to fly to Israel, which yes, I'm going to be doing with a group of. I think it's important for our community to know that the JCRC is taking a group of educators, high school superintendents, heads of school, New Jersey state legislators to see, Israel post October 7th, and to come back to be able to share what they've seen after bearing witness. So I guess that's what you're going to say. But if people can't do that, what are other ways that they can help?
Okay, so I'm going to quote a great American president, Theodore Roosevelt, who famously said, "One must do all they can, where they are, with what they have. All they can, where they are, with what they have." And that's what you should be able to do. You should be able to look at yourself in the mirror and say, am I doing the most I can do for my people? So I would say the best thing one can do is what Linda will be doing next week with these educators, and that's to get over to Israel and show support. Israel is a country whose entire tourism industry is at a standstill. Its entire entertainment industry is at a standstill. It's losing $1 billion shekels a day. So the best way we can show our support is to go over there and to volunteer and show that we care. Is donate, donate, donate. Now, quite often people say, but are you actually getting the equipment? So I can say there's two organizations that I'd recommend. One, and you can see on your message, is the Federation Emergency Fund for Israel, where that money is being coming straight to the soldiers. And the other, Levine Lone Soldier Foundation, where they send pallets of clothes to soldiers and we get it directly to our base. They're two great places to donate to. And last but not least, and I think this is really one of the most moving experiences that I had in my experience in the military, is we brought our wounded soldiers to Barzilai Hospital in Ashkelon, and there was a table outside manned by Ashkelon, and on that table, in addition to all the food and drink, there were lots and lots of cards from students from Jewish primary schools in Australia and the United States, Canada, the UK, who literally send cards to the soldiers. And it was just so moving to see that personal connection. So I would say there's a whole program of writing letters to soldiers. It means so much to us in the foxhole, in the tent, to read those letters, to receive the love and the warmth. And of course, most importantly, to get to Israel and hug a soldier yourself. I think those are the three main things. The most important thing is to do something. To do is to do, right? Not just to talk the talk, but to walk the walk and do the most you can where you are to show that it's not them and us, but we are all one family.
Thank you, Tuvia. And I think our friend, Jordana Horn-Gordon, is back. The lights are on, and she's going to close our program. Jordana.
I'm back. I'm back. I'm on my phone, but I'm back. Sorry about that. Tuvia, thank you so much for being here tonight and for sharing your experience. But mostly thank you for your service, and thank you for your deep sense of love and commitment that you have to your people and to the country of Israel and to Am Yisrael. Please stay safe. And for those who would like to support Federation's work, including all it's doing in Israel, there's a link to donate in the chat and on the screen, which is about to come up. Thank you all for joining us, and good night.